Chapter 4 in Unit 2 is on demand. First thing we want to do is define demand. In order to define demand, we have to define market. And market describes the exchanges between buyers and sellers of goods and services. We also need to define supply. Supply is how much to sell and at what price to sell it at. So the question for buyers is, how much will we purchase and at what price will we purchase? The definition of demand is the amount of goods and services consumers are willing to buy at various prices at a particular time and place. Now, the law of demand says this: if all other things are equal, the higher the price of a product or service, the less of it that people are willing to buy. So the law says the lower the prices, the more people will buy. The higher the prices, the less people will buy. If a price of an item increases, the quantity, note the boldness, quantity demanded drops. An Italian term that we use in economics is ceteris paribus, which simply means all other things are equal. In other words, so the only thing that is changing in this illustration is just the price. So how does the store get rid of an overstock? They lower the price and move it to a clearance rack. We will be graphing the law of demand, and in order to do that, we need a demand schedule, which is just a relationship between the price and the quantity demanded, and we also need a demand curve. And we will simply be plotting points and putting those on a graph and adjoining those points to form a curve. Here's an example of a graph of a demand curve. Notice that the schedule has the price and how many would be demanded at that price. Notice as the price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. And notice on your curve that this is a downward sloping curve. Here are some reasons why demand rises and falls. One would be real income effect. Real income effect is what people can buy with their money. So, for example, if prices increase but the income of an individual or a family stays the same, you cannot buy as much as you once did. So your real income drops. This has happened repeatedly since the recession. This is currently happening in the teaching profession, as we have not gotten raises. However, we continue to pay more for goods and services. Another reason why demand would rise or fall is the substitution effect. So what happens when a price increases? Then we look for a similar product, we look for a substitute. Is there something else that we could use in place of this higher priced item? So this explains why people would buy less when prices are higher, because they'll try to find another product to substitute. Another reason that demand rises and falls is the law of diminishing marginal utility. And basically this just means the more that you get of a product or a service, the less useful it becomes, the less satisfaction that you have. Think about this as getting a cup of lemonade on a really hot day in the summer. That first cup of lemonade is going to be very satisfying and very useful to your thirst. The second one might be equally as good or maybe a little less satisfying. However, think about buying 5 glasses of lemonade and drinking all 5 of them. By the time you get to the 4th or the 5th glass of lemonade, it doesn't have that much satisfaction. Your thirst has already been quenched, and probably you can't even drink that much lemonade. So every one after maybe 1 or 2 really are not that valuable. So that's the law of diminishing marginal utility. Now, when we analyze market demand, and when we're talking about market demand, we are talking about the entire demand of the total market. So that's all of us as consumers combined together. We will use graphs that will show the changes in quantity demanded at various prices, and we will also show changes in the demand curve. Now, currently we've only talked about changing points along a curve. We also have to discuss shifts in the curve. So if a demand curve shifts, which basically means that we are drawing a whole new curve, if it shifts to the right, we are showing an increase in demand, and this would be for some reason other than price. If a demand curve shifts to the left, it is showing a decrease in demand, and again, this is for some reason other than price. If the price just changes, it is just a point along the original demand curve. So here is an example of two demand curves. Notice that the original demand curve we have at a price of $30, no one would buy a CD. However, for some reason, the demand increased. And so at a price of $30 on the new demand curve, one person would purchase that CD. So what we have here is a shift in the demand curve, which again creates an entirely new curve, and a shift to the right, which means increase in demand. What are some of the reasons that a curve would actually shift? Well, it could be the income of consumers. Maybe people got a raise. Maybe they're making more money, and so their demand for a particular product has increased due to making more money. Maybe it's because of change in population. Maybe people moved to a certain area and now they're demanding more of a certain product. Maybe it's just personal preference. I mean, think about you and maybe foods that you eat. You may have, as a younger child, really liked a certain type of cereal, but now your personal preference has changed and you're really not a big fan of that cereal, so you don't buy as much. It could be things such as special influences. It could be things such as fads, such as silly bands that were so popular in the beginning and then really just lost their zeal. People stopped demanding those products. Other causes for a shift in a demand curve would be complements. Think about when you go school shopping. I'm assuming still at your age that you do some school shopping. When you shop for clothes, let's say, or shoes, if you buy a pair of shoes, isn't it common that you also buy socks to go with those shoes? That would be a complement. Those are products or services that are used together and bought at the same time. Another reason for a shift in the demand curve would be a substitute. Again, if you go to buy a product and the price has risen, then you look at that product and think, okay, is there something that I could substitute for this product? Such as maybe your favorite soft drink. Maybe you go to the store today and your favorite soft drink has just doubled in price for some reason. You might substitute that with water or iced tea or lemonade. We also have to discuss elasticity. And basically, elasticity is whether or not you and I, as consumers, respond to a change in price. All right, so why would we do that? If we go to the store today and let's say our favorite bag of chips has all of a sudden jumped $2 a bag, we are probably going to respond to that price change and we're probably not going to purchase those chips because that's quite a jump in price. However, think about insulin, which there are no substitutes for, and insulin is needed for people to live. If I go to the drugstore today and I am a diabetic and I am dependent upon insulin, I'm probably going to buy that insulin at whatever price it is today because I have to have that to live. So elasticity is measured on how sensitive we as consumers react to a change in price. If a product is elastic, if the quantity demanded is elastic, then there is a specific change in price, and that causes a relatively large change in the quantity demanded, such as the bag of chips. It's elastic. Demand changes with price. Inelastic means that a change in price will not bring about much of a change in quantity demanded, such as insulin. Another product would be milk, gasoline, those things that we don't have substitutes for that we pretty much have to buy. Those are inelastic. We're pretty much going to buy them regardless of the price. Why is the demand elastic for some products and not for others? Well, I just explained that. If it is a need then we are probably going to buy that product regardless. If it is just something that we want, something that we prefer, we are probably going to respond to that price change, and it would be elastic. Here is a graph of elasticity showing that if it's inelastic, there is a much less change in the demand, the quantity demanded. If it is an elastic demand, then there is a lot of change that's going to happen with the price increase of a product. So we will be graphing demand in class. We will actually be using papers and pencils, so make sure that you have something to write with on our next class on demand. We will also, after we graph demand, there will be questions online that you will be using your graphs to analyze it, and those will be on My Big Campus, and we'll be doing those in